All right, on today's show, I welcome on a very, very special guest. He is Mike Procopio. He's the director of the Hoop Consultants. Mike, how are you doing today?
Jeff, I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. I want to ask you a question before we start talking about your career and how everything led up to what you're doing now with the Hoop Consultants. But how did you get started with the Hoop Consultants, and how did you decide to start that?
Well, I've had a little bit of a career in basketball. It was like 2009, 2010. I was an assistant coach for the Maine Red Claws, the Celtics, at the time affiliate D-League team in Portland, Maine. And I wanted to do a little bit different things in basketball. Like the training thing was picking up. There's a lot of trainers out there, so a lot of people doing stuff on the physical side with players. And I wanted to do something more. Obviously, I've had a player development background and coaching background, and I continue to do that. But I wanted to do something that could sort of provide information for players and coaches, and especially coaches, where coaches trying to get sort of from A to B, and a lot of coaches really don't know how to get there, especially young coaches. They have an idea where they want to go, but getting there and having somebody who's already been through those experiences and building up their career a little bit, I thought that I could give some insight, especially in the player development side, drill work, philosophy, how to deal with players, how to deal with coaches if you're a player, the really important things to work on, and trying to streamline your career and your process to get to where you want to get to. So I felt as though I could give a good insight by, giving workouts, getting clients to pay to get workouts, to get information, to have a sort of somebody they could bounce things off of that already was at the professional level and had a career in doing what they want to do. So it was pretty cool. I started, it was small. And then, for the last 11 years or so, I had a job with the Dallas Mavericks as director of player development. I still worked in Chicago, working for Tim Grover, worked for Kobe. So I was doing all these other things as my main source of employment, but I always sort of carried the Hoop Consultants with me. And then now, after leaving the Mavericks about 2 years ago, I sort of ramped this up full time to, webinars and workouts and clients and traveling to do clinics and things. So that's sort of the story behind it.
That's amazing. I love it. It's a cool concept, and I think it's great that you're doing that. I mean, your career is absolutely just absolutely amazing. Like have some great career background and everything. To have you as a hoop consultant give other coaches and players advice, I think that's just great that you can offer and lend your expertise in those fields.
It's been cool. It's been really enjoyable to be able to help people. I've always had a passion for it. So many people took me under their wing when I was growing up and coaching. I started coaching, I was 18 years old when I was a freshman at Suffolk University in Boston. And I think the path that I took, I was an assistant coach for an AAU team called the Boston Amateur Basketball Club. And I did that in the spring and early summer. And then all summer I would work 10, 11, 12 weeks of basketball camp in different places across the East Coast. And I met so many older coaches that took me under their wing to help me and give me advice. And I really enjoyed that part of it, and part of just sort of finding my way in this whole thing. And then when I got to a certain point where, my career was going a little bit and I made a little bit of a name for myself, I always wanted to pay it forward with other young coaches and aspiring coaches that wanted to get somewhere into their career and try to help them like the coaches that helped me. I never forgot where I came from with that. And I think that's a really important. Mentorship is a really important part of getting better at anything, but especially coaching. And I think being a mentor it's a special feeling to be able to help as many people that want to be helped.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I think that's true. It's like paying it forward, and you're doing a great job of doing that, paying it forward. I think that's the most important thing. I think that with coaching and basketball too, it's like the connections and having that mentorship, and then be able to give that mentorship back that's so cool.
Yeah, it's enjoyable.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about how you just touched upon it a little bit about how you got started, like becoming a stuff like assistant. How did like what made you want to get into basketball coaching and like what and work with the BABC as well too?
I didn't really know what I wanted to do, Jeff, to be honest with you. I was a freshman at Suffolk, just like any freshman. I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
I was an accounting major that switched over to business management. Um, I always loved basketball. I played it in high school. I was not very good at it, but always one of those guys that always wanted to play. I kept score at this summer league, outdoor summer league in Revere, Massachusetts, is where I sort of grew up from the age of 7 on. And it was this great men's league that I kept score with for years. And there was a referee. There's a referee that worked the camp that was affiliated with the BABC, and AAU wasn't like what it is today. There wasn't very many teams. No one really knew what it was. It was this sort of this underground basketball, this basketball community of teams. And the landscape of basketball back in the 1990s was the best teams. There was only like probably 10% of the teams that there were back then that there are now. It was very unpopular, but the best players played. And like there was only a certain amount of small teams, in Massachusetts. So the best teams played AU. In the summertime, they moved on to these national tournaments, the ones that are good enough to do so. And then all those influx of players that played AAU but didn't qualify for these national tournaments went to basketball camp. So, and then they just sort of moved on. For me, I saw this team. I went to a basketball camp for years down in Cape Cod, and this team, the Boston Amateur Basketball Club, had all these Division I players on it. They would scrimmage the all-stars from this camp once a week, like during the summer. And they had these huge names that obviously they didn't have the internet back then, but you just sort of saw and read about. And it was just this team. Like, what is this team? I had no idea about it. This guy coached it named Leo Papil, who pulled up in a Cadillac, and this Lincoln or Cadillac had like 8 players in it. And so it was like 7 or 8 guys that just came in. We had some pretty good players at the camp. We had Billy Curley, who played for Boston College and went to the NBA. And we had a really good local players that played in the camp that I thought were really good.
yeah.
And then you saw these guys played against them. They beat them by about 40. And I was like, wow. So anyways, I was keeping score at this camp. It was just a luck thing where the referee was wearing like a pair of shorts or something that had BABC's name on. I'm like, where'd you get that shirt or shorts or whatnot? And he goes, well, I sort of affiliated with the team. I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, what do you know about them? We started talking. I was like, I'd love to keep score or work for him or do whatever. And he's like, yeah, I'll get you hooked up with the guys. So I started with him a little bit. And then also I was a manager at Suffolk. So I was like, I sort of liked the whole coaching aspect of basketball. And I didn't really know much about it. I didn't know how to sort of move up in it, but I was a manager. I helped out at my high school, and there was an assistant coach named Tim Collins, who's an athletic director in the Boston area at Natick High School, I believe. But he was an assistant, a grad assistant, and he was telling me about how working all these camps will really help you, in your career. So, I heard about the Red Owlback basketball camp, the Dave Cowan's basketball school. I knew the camp that I would go to down to Cape Cod, but I didn't know about a bunch of these other ones. So he goes, no, I think you need to work all these camps. So I was like, all right, great. And so he got me into a few. I called a bunch, like in the Boston papers, especially in the springtime, there would always be these advertisements once a week about all the basketball camps that were going on. And I just called a bunch of people, and I got connected. I probably worked about 10 straight weeks of camp. So like the camp schedule would be like, you start on Sunday, you finish on Friday, go home, Friday night, Saturday, and then go back Sunday morning, wherever, whatever camp you were going to go to. So I ended up working a sort of a schedule of 10 in a row, mostly in the Massachusetts area. One particularly, I worked in New Hampshire called Phillips Exeter, where I met a bunch of great people, Mike Lunny and Keith Frail and Jerry Frail, who was a head coach at UNH for a long time, was a Hall of Fame coach. But I worked like the Red Auerbach, the Dave Cowens. I went to a camp called the Eastern Invitational Basketball Camp, where it was like more of a recruiting, a basketball recruiting camp, like a showcase camp. The Pocono Mountains, I would go, and just sort of all Boston College, Providence. I mean, you name it. I tried to work the camp, so on the camp circuit. So just coach kids and sort of learn. And the biggest thing about coaching was like not only the coaches that you worked with, but at night, usually every night, there'd be a lounge area set up where they'd buy the coaches pizza and sodas and beer and stuff. And then coaches would just talk shop and sort of that's where you would learn. You would just have a notebook with you. You would just sort of take down as many notes as you can, have conversation with coaches and sort of learn. And not only that, just coach at the camp and just sort of learn by coaching kids in drill stations and games and things. It was pretty cool. It was, for me, it was the best way. It was the best way to get better at coaching because you had all these, experienced coaches trying to help you out and spend time with you. It was pretty cool.
That's so cool. That's a great experience. And like, who's like any of the coaches like that? Like, who was one of the coolest coaches that you sat down with in that lounge area with like the pizza and stuff like that? Like, really helped you?
There was so many coaches like Dave Hopla, who's a world-renowned shooting instructor. I met at that camp down the Cape Cod.
Yeah.
And he would lecture. Like he was the first guy I ever sort of saw he was an unbelievable shooter, like one of the best shooters in the world. You can get him on YouTube and things. He's phenomenal. And Dave would go from camp to camp to camp. And remember, I didn't know anything about this camp circuit or in basketball in general. I would just watch basketball and play it and shoot around. So I had no idea about the whole inner workings. Well, Dave would go probably speak at about 200, 250 camps in the summer. So he'd go Monday to, he'd do like 2 or 3 camps a day. He'd go, go lecture, drive in his car to another camp, drive in his car to another camp.
Wow.
So he would spend the night sometimes at the camps that I would be at. And we would talk about shooting and coaching and basketball in general. And then there'd just be a lot of just normal everyday coaches from all across the East Coast that sort of took you down and sort of mentored you and talked about basketball. And I just got a great chance. There was a guy named, there was, Ricky Boyages, who was an assistant coach at Boston College in the 90s and moved on to Ohio State, and some head coach at William and Mary. And now he works for the Big Ten and with the supervisor of officials. He took me under his wing, just talked X's and O's and talked different things. I didn't know what I wanted to do in coaching, like what area of coaching and expertise that I wanted. And there was just all these coaches. Like I go to the Pocono Mountains and they'd have this camp called the Pocono Invitational. And there'd be a group of 30 coaches, 35 coaches that, you bust your ass during the day. And then at night, you're just kicking back and talking hoop. And Division III coaches and high school coaches and mostly Division III coaches and high school coaches. That's sort of the people that I would probably rub elbows with the most. And it was just great. And
that's awesome.
It was just a great experience to be able to, sort of just share stories and, how they did things, and you pick different things up and you wrote and you took notes down. And that was my first year in it. And then I just started doing it every summer. Like I would do probably 3 or 4 summers in a row where I would do 10 or 11 weeks. I didn't travel. The BABC went to Vegas and these other national events. I was like 18, 19 years old. So I wasn't going to do that. And they didn't have the budget for it. So I would, when they would travel in the summer, I would start my circuit of camps probably like late June and then all the way through. Mike Hart was another guy that, obviously you had on your show that, he took me under his wing and talked to me about things. I mean, he had he built up St. Andrew's School into one of the better prep schools in New England. And he took the time to sort of talk to me about what he did and how he did it. Some of the development things that he did with his kids. He was big into X's and O's. He's a big character like that, as far as like socially, just a great guy and, always get guys laughing. But it was sort of that brotherhood of, sort of working a camp. It was great where you worked a camp with somebody in June. And then 4 or 5 weeks later, you're in like Maine in, at Colby College. And then somebody like, again, you didn't really keep in touch like that. And then you saw them at like the first day or two at camp, and you're like, oh, wow, wait a minute, I just worked with you 5 weeks ago. That's great. And then you just keep carrying on these conversations. And, it sort of taught me a lot about the game. At that point, I didn't know if I wanted to be an assistant coach or a head high school coach or a college coach, but I sort of learned quickly that I wanted to get more into the developmental side. So I started streamlining my summers into working events or working camps or working with players in the player development fashion, and sort of streamlining their development rather than X's and O's and things. But I probably worked camp for a good 10 years. And then finally probably when I worked as a scout with the Boston Celtics, I probably stopped working a steady diet of 10, 11, 12 weeks of camp.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. And like, what was it like to like making that decision, get into player development? I feel like player development now, I don't know if maybe it's because of social media, but I feel like I see a ton of people trying to get into the player development world and everything like that. What was it like to like, get into that world, and like, who were the people that you spoke with and kind of helped you like really make that decision to get into that?
Right.
Yeah.
So a dream of mine from watching Hoop Dreams and things like that, there was a camp called the Nike ABCD camp, and run by a guy named Sonny Vaccaro at the time.
Yeah.
It was this all-star camp. It was a great, I didn't know anything about it. I was more sort of curious of what it was. I remember working a camp with Billy Curley's brother, Mickey Curley, who played at Boston College and was a really good high school player for Duxbury, and went to Boston College and had a little bit of a professional career. Well, in the summer, he was still in high school, and we were about the same age, give or take. And he had this ABCD shirt with like number, I don't know, 216 on it or something. I'm like, what's that camp? And he was like, well, they invite the top players in the country, and they come in and we play, and we have these classes we have to take. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So my first couple of years in working with the BABC and things, like, we sent some of our guys to Nike All-American camp, and they sort of split from Nike ABCD camp went to Adidas ABCD camp, and then the Nike All-American camp sort of followed the same script. Invite about 100 of the best players in the 120 of the best players in the country, let them play, let them drill, play in front of college coaches, and then take these classes, so these academic betterment classes, throughout the week. So I always wanted to work camp, and somebody gave me a phone number for George Raveling, who George is one of the Hall of Fame coach. He coached at USC, Iowa, Washington State, but he was a big Nike executive. He just got out of coaching, was a big Nike exec, and he was the one who was running this camp. So I would go, I called him up, and, I told him who I was with, and he goes, yeah, you could definitely work at, give me your information. And he sent me out, this packet of information about the camp, and, $500 flight. It was in Indiana. So $500, they paid for your flight, gave you a bunch of gear. So you go to this camp, and like future NBA players, Baron Day. The names of the camp were ridiculous. McDonald's All-Americans, future NBA guys. And so I go to this camp, and again, I was coaching at the camp, but they did this thing where they had these college players came in and worked the camp, but also worked out with instructors. And again, back then, there were no real individual instructors. Guys just played. And then if they worked out on their game, they either went to the park by themselves or went to the gym by themselves. They might have had a high school coach that worked them out. But there wasn't really this whole like big, other sort of shadow government of workout guys and trainers. There was nothing like that. So I would do this camp, work the camp, and then the kids would have a couple of hours off to go to these classes as high school kids. So in the gym one day, I just stumbled upon these workouts. Well, you had Vince Carter, you had Tim Duncan, you had they were all in college at the time, and they were doing these workout sessions where they were individual drills. And so they had like maybe 30 of these kids working out with all these other coaches, and most of them had NBA shirts on, like Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State Warriors, these coaches, and they would work these guys out, and they would do all these drills I never really saw before. And I would just watch in the teaching that went on. Well, I'm like, I got to get into this. This is more my style of taking players, getting them better, putting them in game situations, working with them on the court individually, and then put them in game situations and game simulation. So from that, I asked if I could sort of switch over to the other side of the camp instead of, not that year, but obviously in the future. Well, there was this guy named Herb Livesey who was in charge of the college council, was in the college council workouts. He ran a camp called Snow Valley out in Santa Barbara, California. And it was besides 5-star, and it was probably a better teaching camp than 5-star, not a better camp, but a better teaching camp. They had all these coaches from all over the country that come in, and these kids, like usually camp, you played 3 or 4 games a day, you had fun, you played knockout and all that stuff. Well, they didn't do that. That camp was more structured for teaching. So I asked him, I said, can I, is it okay if I come out and work your camp? And he goes, yeah. And, I watched him lecture and I watched him work, and he took me under his wing as sort of a mentor to teach me how to get players better, how to talk to players, the drills you do, the teaching points that you use. And he was a really old school coach. He's about 82 years old now. He still scouts in the NBA. He's a longtime scout, longtime high school and college coach. But he took me under his wing like year in and year out. He was working in the minor leagues, and then he went to the Portland Trailblazers. But he would always do things like we would always have a email back and forth about workouts and teaching and whatnot. And then he would also educate me on the scouting side and sort of, the scouting and the player evaluation side in basketball, as well as the teaching side. And I sort of combined the two, how to evaluate players, what skills that they needed to get better at to be high level players at their level, if it was high school or college or professional.
Yeah.
And that really helped me as far as the teaching side of not only the development side, but the player evaluation side. And Herb was, a big influential part in my life. And he also, another gentleman who worked at camp was named Tate's Locke. Well, Tate's was Bobby Knight worked for Tate's at Army, and he went from Army to Miami of Ohio to head coach at Clemson. And, he had this huge career in basketball that he worked at all these places and all these, he was just a great teacher of the game. So, I stayed in contact with him, and he's still a close friend of mine today. Same thing in his 80s. He was scouted in the NBA. And again, guys like that, having bookends of two that really taught you player development and sort of how to work with players and teach. So I was in love with player development probably after my second or third year sort of working camp. Like I was like any other coach, like, I wanted to like memorize these plays and X's and O's, and maybe I'd be a high school coach. I never really had huge aspirations of coaching in Kentucky or anything. Yeah. I just wanted to be I just want to be a basketball coach.
Yeah.
But then that switch from, all right, like team coaching to individual coaching, it really took a sort of a turn for itself. And the gentleman that I worked with named Leo Papil, he was a basketball lifer, worked for Rick Pitino at Boston University when Rick was starting his career. And then Leo, was an assistant coach at Cleveland State. He worked at Suffolk University as well, but he worked at Cleveland State when they were really good. And then he ran his team. I think he's run his team for over 40 years now. So he was sort of really ingrained in this basketball, had one of the best teams in the country. Now there's like tournaments everywhere nationwide, but back then, especially in July, there weren't that many tournaments. So Vegas, which everybody knows about being a hotbed of like tournaments throughout the summer, there was only really one tournament in Vegas. It was called the LVI, the Las Vegas Invitational. And they had about 64 of the best teams in the country. Guys like, every player you name, every big time team would be invited to this tournament, and was sponsored by Nike. Well, Leo's team, again, these kids from Boston, you never really heard about, or you heard about it if you knew, but Boston wasn't really a hotbed of talent. They didn't have a lot of individual, like 12, like great McDonald's All-American players. They would have 2 or 3 really good players. Yeah. But they would all be just these Boston tough kids. And then they end, Leo would win the tournament every year. I think he won it like 3 out of 4 years or 2 out of 3 out of 4 years, I believe.
Wow.
And like he had this great team. Well, when Rick Pitino came to the Celtics, he hired Leo as his head scout.
Huh.
So at the time, I didn't know much about the NBA besides obviously watching it and reading the newspaper about it. Well, when Leo got the head scouting job, he sort of brought me around the NBA a little bit and sort of taught me about it. And I had access to some things like Rick Pitino's pre-draft workouts that he did his first summer were done at Suffolk University. They used to do it at a bigger place that wasn't really locked down like Fort Knox and too many people were going in and out. He wanted a sort of a secret place to work guys out. Well, Suffolk was located right up the street from the Celtics offices at the time in Boston, right in the heart of it. And Suffolk had this like basement gym that no one really knew about. It was a real small gym. And he would bring like Keith Van Horn and David Wesley and all these Celtic players or players they were evaluating for the draft. And, so I got in the gym. I was allowed to go and watch the workouts. So, it was a pretty cool thing. Well, when NBA players would come in the summer and maybe no one was around, Leo would ask me to work them out, like Bruce Bowen. Bruce Bowen was the one guy I worked with when he was with the Celtics early on in his career, and being able to work him out. But Leo sort of got me into the NBA, sort of got me around it. I didn't work for the Celtics until Pitino left. I think I started in like 2003, and it was a pretty cool experience just to be around that NBA aspect of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then that's sort of what got me into working out, better players, pro players. I worked out college guys. I would go to like every day. I would like in the morning, maybe I'd go to Boston College and work their players out. I then would work out some local guys, some maybe guys are playing overseas or not. And then I would drive down to Providence at night and work out players at Providence and then come home late at night. So my schedule, and again, wasn't getting paid for it. Like it was illegal for college teams to pay you to work their players out in the summer. So what I would do is I would work their guys out and then they would have me speak at camp. And then, they would usually take care of me on a speaking fee. But, mostly I wanted to do, work out guys at BC, Providence, BU, Northeastern to really get better at, being this young kid working out college players to be able to have presence on the floor. And that's one thing that I think that young people that are working in basketball now that are trainers or working in player development, like having presence. It's not the drills that you do, but having the presence of having them believe that you know what you're doing, but B, knowing your craft inside and out to be able to correct. And I think like, to me, players getting repetitions, but you being able to correct them is more important than some elaborate drill that you do that looks really good. And, and you're not really able to teach. I think the teaching aspect of the game is something that, and actually making corrections and know what you're doing. I think that's sort of a lost art form in the player development realm today.
Yeah, that's it's crazy. I think teaching is the biggest thing, even in coaching as well, and in the player development. I actually just had this conversation with Coach Tom Newell about teaching how important it is to be as a coach to be able to be. You could be a player, but you have to learn how to teach in the aspect if you want to get into the coaching aspect. I think that's the biggest thing ever. Yeah. I think you have to learn how to, I think that's another thing that people don't realize. You have to learn to be a teacher as well, too. An instructor, you might be able to do it, but you might not be able to show it or teach how to do it.
Yeah. Like for me, I was a terrible player. Mm-hmm. So like, it was funny. I was working out this kid named Sean Conley. Sean was a local legend in the North Shore of Massachusetts. Was one of the leading scorers, like career wise in Massachusetts for high school. Went to Providence, transferred to Ohio State. So I brought him to Suffolk to work out. I was probably like, it's probably my senior year at Suffolk.
Yeah.
And I was working out Sean and I was trying to instruct demonstrate something. I wasn't a huge demonstrate guy, but I just wanted to get the footwork down or on some shot. Yeah. And I like literally hit the side of the backboard or some brick, like ridiculous. Well, I had a kid that played at Suffolk. It was an older kid. Was from Lisbon, and he was a character. And he goes, Mike. After the workout, we were done, and he goes, Mike, I'm gonna give you some advice. never demonstrated another drill ever again. And I was like, you know what? You're pretty much right on that. I never demonstrated ever again after that. But my thing was the teaching part and correcting part, like watching film, watching how to do it, watching so many games. And you didn't have YouTube back then. So anything you can get your hands on to try to like watch and study and things like that. I think again, the teaching aspect and learning from guys like Herb and Tate's Lock, and there was a guy named Dave Severance who worked in the NBA forever, but he's another guy that I sort of gravitated to. We would always go back and forth and talking about teaching and things like that. But I think obviously knowing your craft is important, knowing how to teach, but also knowing how to correct. And that's the biggest thing. Like for me, my workouts are mostly boring. They're intense, but they're boring. They're doing the same things over and over and over again, but having your eyes on the player at all times to be able to correct them on the spot, to be able to, give them a 30 second sound bite of what they did wrong, what they need to do to fix it, and then move them on is really important. So I think if you're trying to get into player development, I think it's so overrated to be a player or someone who is a good player. But you do need to be able to teach it and know what you're talking about. And usually if you're a player that's trying to get into player development, you're a little rough around the edges as far as the teaching part. Like a lot of players don't know why they were good. They were just good. A lot of them were physically naturally good, or they just had a good knack for it through osmosis of a coach to work with them through their skill development. But then actually translating that into teaching it is a different world for a lot of players who played. Not everybody. I don't want to put the whole group in there, and then for people who didn't play, like they're usually a little bit more technically sound with their teaching. But the problem is they don't understand players, and they'll talk to them for 10 minutes or 5 minutes on a correction. Not 10 minutes, it's a long time, but 3 minutes on a correction, 4 minutes on a correction. And people's attention spans, especially players' attention span, young players, they'll tune them out in 2 seconds. So there's a plus minus to not only playing, there's a plus for that, but there's also a minus for it. There's also, if you didn't play and you came through video or however you came into coaching, there's a plus for it because again, you didn't play, you probably weren't that good of a player and had that aspect to it.
Yeah.
But you probably paid attention more. Yeah. But you forgot about the presence of players and how to communicate to them, and then like not having good presence or players tuning you out. So you have to have that sort of, I think that sort of balance of, the playing background is important, but more of like knowing like how people and players tick, and obviously knowing your craft to be able to correct it and combining the two,
Yeah. It's like understanding people and understanding like how it would work. Like I think you have to understand the players. And like you said, people don't have the longest attention spans, especially now with like social media. There's like, 10, 15-second videos now of everything. Like everyone's attention spans is what it used to be. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think doing the 30-second thing is great because you're still moving through the drill and then you get your message across.
Yes.
That's great. So what was it like too working with the Celtics? You were a scout. You started out as a scout with them. What was it like? Did you report to Danny Ainge at all too?
Yeah. So here's my deal with it. So my guy Leo Papio was the head scout. They had another guy named Chris Wallace who was the general manager. I sort of bumped into Chris from time to time.
Yeah.
When he was, in different basketball avenues, and Chris is a longtime mentor of mine. So the Celtics got sold to the new ownership group that owns them today, Wick Grossbeck and Steve Pagluca and their big team of people. So they had a transition they were going through. They just ended with Rick Pitino. They made the Eastern Conference Finals. And so they made that run. I was around the team a little bit, but not very much. They had me work out players for them that the coaching staff sort of didn't want to work with during the season if they signed a guy or whatever. So I was sort of around them and had friendships with a lot of the staff. Well, when they went through this transition, they made, right before they did the sale, they traded for Vin Baker.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
Right. So they needed somebody to sort of not to keep an eye on, but just sort of be in the house with Vin. Right. Yeah. So they hired me to live with Vin Baker. So like they couldn't hire me officially because the team got sold. But usually when you sell a team in the NBA, like it takes months for that new people to take over.
Yeah.
And in between the sale and the new people officially taking over, like there's usually a hiring freeze. So they couldn't really pay or they couldn't hire new people, especially in front office positions. So they said, hey, Mike, we'll pay you like $300 a week. You come in, you're going to live with Vin and you'll talk to him and stuff. And when he goes to practice, we want you to come in and we want you to like break down this film again, not scouting, more making these scouting tapes of these European players, because like the European thing was starting to get big with scouting and players coming over. Yep. So they wanted somebody to break down film and get information about European players. So that first year that I worked, like that was a Darko Milicic draft. So there was like 4 or 5 players that were probably going to go in the first round. At that time was unprecedented with European players. So it was more of an education of how to make film, how to break down film, how to order film, and make these scouting tapes. Some were good, some weren't. Chris Wallace would teach me all the ropes about that. And then we would talk about evaluation. We would, go to local games to scout. He would, and I would just drive him and go with him. And he would talk to me about how these teams are run, how to evaluate the mistakes that he made and the pluses and minuses he made throughout his career at that time, leading into it. So it was more of a paid internship for me. So like I did the Vin thing for a few months and then I moved out of his house. And then I sort of once the new ownership took over, they hired me officially. So I would just, again, carry on that European thing where I would just break down these international guys and get in as much intel as possible. And then talk to anybody that want to talk about how to get better at evaluating players. So it was pretty cool. My first couple, and then Danny Ainge took over that year. So Danny took over during the playoffs. So I didn't know Danny at all. And, I just said hello. I didn't know if I was going to have a job. Usually in those things, when a new guy takes over, they usually fire everybody. But I was sort of new to it. So I had no idea about how it worked. So Danny sort of took me under his wing, man. We became really close. And, as far as like just being able to go back and forth, he thought I was a funny guy. Yeah. I had a lot of good sort of intel in basketball just because like I would work the Nike All-American camp in the summer. I'd work out these college guys. I'd work the Michael Jordan flight school in the summer where like Michael ran this camp for kids, but then it would bring in all these big time college and high school kids to work his camp. And then they would play at night with him in front of the whole camp. Yeah. So I would like work out those guys and they would be draft prospects. So like, and again, it was hard to get in those camps. And I already had that foundation from doing it for a few years before I even joined the Celtics. So like, that was sort of my deal with him in the sense that like, I didn't know a lot. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, no worries.
I didn't know a lot about, like scouting or anything, but I was always around really good players in the summertime. So so I would do my European thing. I would go around, hang around Danny, and Danny would give me some assignments and I would get him information or do some things. So Danny just sort of took me under his wing again, how the NBA was run. And that's what I needed to learn. It was a pretty interesting deal when I was at the Celtics. After my first year, I told you about Dave Hopper, the shooting coach. Well, he ran these like college shooting camps in the summertime. He would have, come in on Friday, leave on Sunday, just have all these college kids come in. They'd do 2 sessions a day, learn how to shoot, and then do all these drills during the day. Well, he did one in Chicago and one in Philly. And we did one in Chicago at Tim Grover's gym. And Tim at the time was working out all these NBA players. Michael just ended his career in Washington. So he was working out all these NBA players. So we did this camp in his place in August. And during that time, Antoine Walker had a charity game in Chicago at the United Center, and he had all these NBA players coming to Chicago. They would party it up, but they would do this charity game, have 10,000 people come to the game. So in between sessions on like a Saturday, I always wanted to work for Tim Grover. Again, this training thing never really took off anywhere. It was like sort of like an underground thing. So he would have all these NBA players come into Chicago to work with him. And I thought that was the most like unbelievable thing to read about. So I wanted to be a part of it more than I wanted to be with the Celtics or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So like Tim would never give me the time of day. Again, I just finished my first year with the Celtics. I knew Paul Pierce a little bit.
Yeah.
And so Paul came in for the charity game. And in between sessions, we have like a 2-hour window where we would just get lunch and come back. So I was walking out of Grover's gym. Pierce was walking into Grover's gym. And he was like, hey, Mike, can I get a workout in? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to lunch, but I'll come back early and work you out. Is that okay? He goes, yeah, I'm going to lift with Tim Grover. Like Tim was more of a strength and conditioning guy than he was the basketball guy.
Yeah.
But you know, they had no one really to work the players out. So I'm like, yeah, let me grab lunch and I'll come back and I'll get you a workout in. So I did that. I, went lunch, came back, he came down, got shots up and worked out on the floor. And Tim Grover was right there watching. And, I put him through like an hour workout. And he goes, Mike, and he came up to me. He finally knew my name. I had no idea. I don't even think he knew my name, actually. He came up, we talked, and he goes, how would you like to work for me? And I literally had to do a double take because that was sort of in my mind. I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to come to Chicago, impress Tim, and then work for Tim. So Tim came and said, yeah, I'd like for you to work with me. I said, well, I got to work for the Celtics. That's my job of employment. Are you talking about year round? He goes, no, what I do isn't year round. It's like 3 months. It's like in the sun. It's like July 1st to October 1st. I'm like, hey, look, I'd love to do this. Maybe we can do something where I'd work for the Celtics for 9 months and I work for you for 3 months. And he goes, yeah, that would work. So when I went back to the Celtics, after that weekend, I talked to Danny about it, and Danny was like, yeah, that'd be an unbelievable idea. You could work with all these like NBA guys that we might be able to sign on this, and it might help down the line to have relationships with these NBA guys.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I mean, that really makes sense. And so, yeah, that's sort of in my first year of living with Vin Baker, learning from Chris Wallace, learning from Danny when he took over. And then the Grover thing, it sort of started my career up a little bit where I was learning how to scout. But during the summertime, I'd work out all these NBA players like Jawan Howard, Michael Finley, Dwayne Wade, Sean Livingston, like again, these guys, all these NBA players, Bobby Simmons, there's a lot of, Tony Allen, Delonte West, like we had so many great players come through the gym, and to be able to, Quentin Richardson, so many good players that came and worked out. So they would work out with me, in the morning time. They'd start coming at about 8 a.m. Mm-hmm. So and they would from 8 to 1, these players would be coming. So you'd be on the court for literally like 5 hours. Oh, and then you would, after the workouts, you would grab something to eat, come back. The players would get their basketball workout in, go upstairs. They had like this health club. It was called Hoops to Gym. It was a basketball facility, 3 courts. And then Tim had this bandbox little weight room upstairs with all this equipment in it, but it was really small. It was literally like the size of a big restaurant bathroom. It was small. Oh my God. But guys would come in, they would do a circuit of like exercises. He would make them shakes, do their nutrition stuff. But so they'd work out in basketball, go up and work out with Tim. They would grab a little lunch and come back, and then they would all play in the afternoon from 2 to 4. Yeah. So they would have NBA referees work the camp. I mean, they would actually low-level NBA refs, not the big-time refs, but some of the refs that you would see ref in the finals games, you would see coming through Chicago to come through and work these games. And you'd have 15, 20 NBA players playing pickup during the week. So yeah, so that was, for me, that was unbelievable. And I did that for a couple of years until the NBA shut that down. They didn't let NBA personnel work for an NBA team and then have the opportunity to work out. They think it was tampering with working out NBA players in the summertime. Yeah. So the rule is you needed to be able to work only with your own players. So eventually I had to make the decision right before, right around 2007, about a year before they won the championship. Danny called me up and goes, Mike, I want you here, but you have to make a decision. Do you want to work for Tim? Or you want to work for me? And for me, I loved scouting. I love evaluation. I love being with the Celtics, but my first passion and love was working with players. And to be able to work with, work with NBA guys in the summer. Also, they had about a group of 10 or 12 players that college kids that were getting ready for the NBA draft every summer. So like in May, June, they would have these pre-draft training sessions, training camp, I guess you would call them, in Chicago. So, we would do that for about 6 weeks, get these guys ready for the NBA draft. Again, Dwayne Wade, he had Dwayne Wade, he had Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala, Channing Frye, had all these guys getting ready for the draft, working with Tim. So being able to do the pre-draft training, then the NBA guys in July and August and September, and then then we started doing it year round, and it sort of became my passion from that. So that's sort of where I went from there.
That's crazy. And what's Tim like? But I know he seems like a very intense guy. What's it like? Like
He's a tough nut to crack. He's a tough nut to crack. He is a very intense, focused individual. Tell you the truth 100% of the time. But with Tim, you always knew where you stood.
Yeah.
You always knew where you stood, and he would always make time for you. If he saw that you were loyal to him, he'd do anything, and I mean anything, to help you out. But he's very educated. He knows what he's talking about. He has presence with players, and he's an unbelievable person to work for. And like I said, he'll tell you right to your face. If you ain't doing your job, he'll tell you right to your face. But if you did your work, you worked hard every day, and you had his back, he'd be the best supporter of you that you could ever have. But the players, just again, he played Division I at University of Illinois Chicago, but have a guy that doesn't look like he played.
Yeah,
was in great shape, shape. But like, to have these NBA players that were superstars listen to a guy who never played in the NBA the way they do, and have that back and forth, that to me was, I need to be like that if I want to be good. And Tim looked 12,000 times better than I do. But like, to have that presence of players, look them in the eye and be honest.
Yeah.
He was the one who really taught me to do that. And, I mean, Tim was by far my favorite boss of all time. And I'd take a bullet for Tim. Tim's a phenomenal human being that helped me tenfold and always supported me. But again, just his style, it fits my personality. And I mean, like, players, he'd have a client once in a while that was mouthing off to referees and not doing it the right way, and always, questioning things. And it cost a lot to work out with Tim. Yeah. It probably cost you over $10,000 a month to work out with him, to get this training. And I've seen him at least once come up to a player with a check for $30,000 and you almost give him his money back and say, hey, look, take this check. I don't want your money, or rip up I forgot what he did, either wrote him a check or ripped up his own check, that the guy gave him. But like, he had no qualms. If you weren't doing things the right way, that the way they needed to be done, he didn't care. It wasn't like, he's not one of those guys who takes Instagram pictures of players and stuff. He's really serious of what he does. He's not really doing it for, notoriety or social media, or at the time there was no social media, but he wasn't doing it like to be a celebrity trainer. I don't care if you played in Taiwan or you played as a max contract in the NBA, he expected you to do what he needed you to do to be successful. If not, he had no time for you.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool, and that's great that you were able to learn from him. What's the biggest thing that you found out, like, working with those NBA players? What did they have specific things they wanted to work on, or did you guys go through different drills? Like, was there a thing certain NBA players always?
I think Tim expected you to do your homework on every player you worked with. So, again, they didn't have YouTube back then. They didn't have, the internet really didn't have what they had today, not even close. So
yeah,
going into every player that we worked with, I'm one of those basketball nuts that sort of watched every game you could and got every little detail of information you could, but also had an extensive DVD collection of games, when I was working for the Celtics. So
Yeah.
if we were saying, hey, look, we're going to bring in, Tracy McGrady, I need you to, you to do as much homework as you can on him. And I want you not only to work on the things that he's not great at, but some of the things he might just have to add to be even better. Now, it wasn't Tracy, but like that's just an example.
Yeah.
But so for some players that were still transitioning and developing in their first 4 or 5 years of their career, you would sort of dictate the things that I think they needed to work on, as well as the stuff that they said, hey, I need to get better at X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
The players like a Juwan Howard or Michael Finley, or at the time, and guys like that were veterans that sort of knew what they were doing and sort of been through it 6 or 7 years already.
Yeah.
They would just sort of, it's more of a tune-up,
Yeah.
coming in, get shots up, get moving, maybe add something, but you weren't adding anything to them. Those guys are very, even though they were great guys, they were very intimidating to work out at first, and just because they had presence and they were already big time players in the league. I'm never intimidated in working with somebody, but there was, like, again, they don't know you and you have to sort of develop that trust with them.
Yeah.
They were a little intimidating at first. So just sort of going with the flow, making small tweaks if you saw them, but like sort of just going through a workout to get them moving, shots that you knew that they shot in games. That's more like, if you're going to work out a vet, that's probably what you would do. Even a young Dwayne Wade, working out with him on his post game, on some of the things that he could do in the post, some of the things that MJ would do in the post, or even Kobe would do in the post. And then you would bring it to their game, teaching him some things in the post that he never did before. Like, those are things you would do even for a great young player that you would try to add. To me, after like 5 or 6 years in the NBA, it's more like maintenance. The shots you're going to get in games. You might want to add a thing or two, but for the most part, it's just all about your routine and keeping it as sort of disciplined and sort of consistent as possible.
That's